And so they are shared slow streets where cars are allowed, but as a guest, they would drive maybe 10 miles an hour. There's a network of greenways. And the idea really is that those should be public places. They should be places where kids can play and you can hang out and you can sit on your front stoop and talk to your neighbors.
Meet Jan Sramek, the man behind plans to build a new city for up to 400,000 people. Originally from the Czech Republic, Sramek attended Cambridge University and the London School of Economics, and after a brief spell in finance, he entered the tech startup scene. In 2017, he began seeking investment for a very different type of startup, and so far he's done well, with Welsh-born investing legend Sir Michael Moritz and the Irish-born Collison brothers among his backers. But despite the project's European origin story and the distinctly European feel to its designs, this is an American endeavour, backed by no less than $1 billion. We spoke to Sramek about his urbanist vision before asking ourselves, should it happen? Will it happen? And what case exists, if any, for doing something like this in Europe? But first, to Solano County. Located roughly halfway between San Francisco and Sacramento, the low-grade grasslands of East Solano were identified by Sramek as an ideal location. Building a new city isn't easy, even for a government. So as a private individual, where does one even begin?
It was pretty hard to get people to believe in it in the beginning. If you read the press reports, you'd think that some billionaires got together in a smoke-filled room and smoked cigars and decided to start a new city. The reality is that the first time when I tried to raise money for this, nobody would invest. And so I had to go and borrow way too much money and go into deep personal debt to buy the first properties and to do some of the early work. And only after we had done that, people would invest. And I think the first round was $10 million. And then another 10. And so it took a long, long time and 8 years to get to where we are today, where we've raised $1 billion and purchased about 70,000 acres, which for context is about twice the size of San Francisco.
As solutions to housing crises go, building a new city is certainly on the radical end, if not fantastical. So the first and most obvious question is, why? If San Francisco has a housing crisis, why not just build more housing in San Francisco? As it turns out, this isn't easy. San Francisco's coastline presents a natural barrier to expansion, to which its well-heeled residents have added countless legal and political barriers. Today, 34% of San Francisco's land is zoned for single-family homes, and that share is even higher in other cities. According to a report by the state government, California has seen a steady decline in house building, especially since the 1970s. The same report estimates that California has been underbuilding by an average of 100,000 homes per year for 30 years, putting the accumulated shortfall at some 3 million homes. Given the scale of its housing shortfall, perhaps radical ideas like new cities have a role to play. So what exactly is the architectural vision for East Solano?
Very traditional European and American pattern, row houses and small and medium-sized apartment buildings, 3 to 8 stories, neighborhoods that are anchored around the local shopping street where you can get most of your daily necessities on foot. And then we have a network of movement streets, boulevards if you want, that run about every half a mile. In those, we have transit running in dedicated central lanes. So we have BRT basically, bus rapid transit. And then inside the super blocks, which are about half a mile by quarter of a mile, there's about 16 blocks inside each of the super blocks. And the streets within that are generally inspired by the Dutch Woonerfs or other neighborhoods like that.
The Dutch Woonerf is a type of living street, which is a shared space designed with the interests of pedestrians and cyclists in mind, through subtle traffic calming measures like trees, narrow lanes, and textured surfaces.
This could be in a 20-unit apartment building. This could be a row house that has a kind of one family living in it, a single family row house if you want. This could be another small apartment building. This could be a row house that is divided into 3 flats, very common in places like London and Dublin. And each of them is separately rented or sold. And all of these are both for rent and for sale. We believe that we'll be able to deliver one of these starter walk-up flats. So basically a 2-bedroom, one and a half bathrooms floor in a walk-up row house for about $425,000 in today's dollars. I would expect that we also build some grand row houses, something that looks like maybe one of these, that has 3 stories and it's over 3,000 square feet and it's got a backyard. And those probably will cost $900,000, $950,000.
California's median home value has now climbed above $800,000. So the new city's range of $425,000 to $950,000 caters to a reasonably broad group. In 1960, the Irvine Company started what is today Irvine, California, while on the East Coast, Columbia, Maryland, dates to around the same period. Not so long ago, every city in America was a new city, as was every city in Europe. The UK has built a host of new settlements in various waves, and with varying degrees of success. Those that have fared the best are the likes of Milton Keynes and Welwyn Garden City, which have benefited from good transport links and proximity to the capital. Milton Keynes was initiated by the UK government in the 1960s, and was designed around detached houses, cars, roundabouts, and its signature concrete cows. But while this aesthetic may not be to everyone's liking, the city has provided affordable housing for some 290,000 people and continues to experience strong economic growth. East Solano differs from Milton Keynes not just in its aesthetic and higher density, but its privately funded model. In this respect, it bears closer resemblance to Irvine, California, or going further back, to Edinburgh Newtown and the great estates of London and Dublin. Dublin's signature Georgian aesthetic is largely down to just 2 landowner families. And while these Georgian gems are cherished by residents and tourists alike, they come at a cost. The city's extensive preservation orders mean that not only can a Georgian building not be touched, but construction is often forbidden near them, and they're exempted from energy efficiency regulations. How to balance historic preservation and progress is a particular challenge for Europe, which also exists in San Francisco with its late 19th century Victorians. Despite the challenges, building within cities, or infill, is still the preferred method of densification in environmentally conscious societies. But if a city's politics and architectural legacy make it hard to build there, the case for a new city nearby gets stronger. Not because it is necessarily good, but because it is less bad than what we are currently doing, namely low-density sprawl. The East Solano project still has its challenges. The company behind the project is called California Forever, and when it began purchasing farmland, it did so through a subsidiary, Flannery Associates. Such discrete third-party purchases are commonplace in real estate, to avoid land speculation driving up prices, even when the buyer is the government. But this secrecy created uncertainty, and with subsequent revelations of billionaire backers, the project was enveloped by an air of intrigue, if not outright suspicion. And then things got messy. The company launched a lawsuit against certain landowners for alleged price fixing, and despite a judge seeing merit in the claims, this is the stuff that PR nightmares are made of. A person's view on the project overall will likely vary according to the distance they maintain from it. When we see an interview with a resident or farmer who wishes to preserve the character of their area, human nature is to be sympathetic. But if we zoom out and see the Bay Area's housing politics pushing people away from its mild climate into the sprawling American interior using more land and air conditioning, we realize that every person coastal California retains is a win for the planet, especially if it retains them at density. As for the landowners of East Solano, California Forever claims to have spent almost $1 billion buying land from 600 of them. While money isn't everything, they would seem to now be millionaires many times over, and in far better shape than California's renters. Our relationship to East Solano began and ended with a Zoom interview, but we recognize that we are probably more sympathetic to the project than most. As an urbanism channel, we've come to despair at how hard it is to build within cities. In a recent episode, we showed how plans for apartments on some of San Francisco's parking lots were refused after 7 years of planning delays, a product of the city's infamous housing politics. This doesn't mean that we should give up on infill. Innovative policies like street votes, which we covered in another episode, allow neighborhoods to democratically densify, and hopefully such ideas take off. But realistically, these policies will take years to have an impact, if they happen at all. In our view, new towns and cities will have to play a role. And as it happens, we've built 4 of them, at least digitally. Here is a clip from one such episode, discussing the subject of beauty. Beauty is of course subjective, but generally speaking, humans are drawn to streets that balance order and variety. which can be achieved with subtle ornamentation and allowing plot owners to deviate from an agreed design code. How to balance order and variety is a key question for any new city, including East Solano.
It's not Houston, it's not completely free for all, but it's also not Irvine in Orange County, which is very narrow range of what you can build. It's somewhere in the middle. It's creativity by architects and builders within some set of parameters, with us providing common infrastructure and I think common design language when it comes to pavements and benches and lighting and bollards and trees and public kind of architecture and infrastructure that gives the city a cohesive design language that I think people enjoy.
Aside from aesthetics, a new city offers practical advantages. For starters, building on greenfield land is cheaper and faster than infill. And technologies that permit density, such as dynamic road and parking pricing, are much easier to bake in from the start than trying to convince residents of low-density cities to give up their ridiculously cheap parking. What's more, there are no prima donna Georgians or Victorians to worry about, and most importantly, the planning codes of the new city can address the arbitrary and sometimes crazy building regulations that have built up in the old systems over time. So should East Solano happen? The project's website, californiaforever.com, provides a wealth of information so people can decide that for themselves. In our view, the economic and environmental case is strong, but we've already explained our backstory and our natural sympathies, which are probably heightened by the city's European influences. And this begs another question. Could something like this work in Europe?
I think it has a lot of potential in Europe. I mean, obviously the answer depends a little bit on the country. I know that there has been an effort to restart new towns, at least in the UK, over the last few years. I mean, UK has a history of doing this. I would imagine that it's similar in Ireland. I think one of the challenges in Europe is going to be with acquiring the land, in that the ownership in Europe is generally a lot more fragmented. And so the coordination of problem of getting everyone on the same page might be a bit more complicated. UK might actually benefit from the fact that you still have some of these grand estates that have the contiguous ownership. But it does feel like some of this should happen in the UK and in places like Ireland probably as well.
The highest demand for housing in the UK is in London and southern England. London's growth is inhibited by the so-called Green Belt, which isn't really that green. And in the 60-mile arc between Oxford and Cambridge, there has long been a desire to create a Silicon Valley of Europe. There have also been proposals for a new town of up to 200,000 people near the hamlet of Tempsford, where a planned new rail line connecting Oxford and Cambridge meets the existing East Coast Main Line. Given the national importance of these two cities and their exorbitant house prices, town extensions have also been suggested to address affordability there. Whether England manages to create a Silicon Valley of Europe remains to be seen. But right now, the Silicon Valley giants are not in England, they're in Ireland, presumably for the Georgian gems. Ireland's house building began falling behind demand after the financial crisis, and the total shortfall is now estimated at over 200,000 homes. The country built around 30,000 homes last year, and the smart money is on the government missing its target of building 300,000 by 2029. The idea of a new city is one we'd like to return to, and perhaps model what it might look like. So if you'd like to help us, please subscribe on Patreon, which will give you access to our Discord, and we always welcome sponsorship interest. So back to East Solano. Will it happen? A bunch of rich guys trying to build a tech utopia is a hard story to change, even if it's not true. Sramek has already said that this will be a normal city for normal people, which will pay its taxes like every other city. But we live in a suspicious online age, with plenty of resentment out there, due in part to expensive housing, ironically.
I would just say that people who care about urbanism and solving the housing crisis, I think in both Europe and in the States, it's really important that that becomes a key policy issue for policymakers, and they kind of support it in whatever ways, in local community meetings, on social media, whatever it is, because the NIMBY voice tends to be pretty loud. And the only way that that's going to be managed is if the people who care about it speak up. And I think we've done a pretty good job of starting to do that in California in the last 10 years. I think Ireland and the UK similarly have been doing a pretty good job, but a lot more of it needs to happen. Capitalism
has long been criticized for producing too many luxuries and not enough necessities. and techno-capitalism is no different. Silicon Valley sends us some great stuff, but what is most visible is the endless stream of gadgets and cat videos. So when Sramek comes along and proposes to divert some of this tech money into bricks and mortar, this is something new. An immigrant convincing rich people to back his vision is the kind of story that America used to celebrate. And San Francisco used to be a city that built a bridge in 7 years. Now it takes 7 years to block apartments on a parking lot. In our view, East Solano might not be perfect, but it's not a utopia, and hopefully Californians give it a chance.